Okay. Good evening. I just kind of want to review where we're at and what lays before us for this course. This is March 24th, so officially week 11 of the course. In 2 weeks we have our final exam, so that'd be week 13, which is April 7th, 2015. And it kind of snuck up on me because usually I give you 2 weeks to do the take-home, and usually have the take-home ready by class, so you have 2 weeks, but I don't. So it kind of snuck up on me. But as you know, we have week 14 is a canceled week. I'm going to be away either in Baltimore or Hershey. I can't remember where I'm at that day, but I won't be here. So we'll have our final exam on week 13, which is April 7th. And then on April 21st, that's our last meeting, and that is just going to be, we'll review the final exam quickly, and then you guys will do your final projects, okay? So I guess I could make, the take-home will be ready this week. I'll probably do it tomorrow, make it tomorrow, make it available on Blackboard, and I'll send an email as well if you guys check your email. I'll make it available under take-home exams, and it'll say final exam. I could, you could turn it in week 13, or if you wanted, since we don't meet that week, I could extend it to April 14th. I won't be here, so you'd have to leave it in front of a box in my office or something. You have to arrange to get it to me that week, even though I'm not here, okay? So the take-home exam will be available probably tomorrow, okay? And I'll send an email when it's available. But it'll be very much, the final exam will be very much like the midterm exam. There'll be a 60-point in-class component, a 40-point out-of-class component. The out-of-class component will be multiple choice and problems. Did I say out-of-class? The in-class component will be multiple choice and problems. The out-of-class will be solving things with Excel. And this one's a little bit different since you use templates for everything. I've also received some questions on the final project, and I'll try to answer all of them, like in general as possible. A couple things. People ask me, what if the data I have is proprietary, meaning, you don't want to give up sales data for your company. I understand that. You don't present on that. What we've had people do in that past is we've kept the context of the problem, but they fabricated data. You know what I'm saying? Instead of showing that your sales at your store were $1 million, maybe you said, well, they're $500, but keep the trend. You know what I'm saying? So keep the data, but maybe fake the data a little bit. But keep the project, try to keep it as realistic as possible. But I understand sometimes it's data that you don't want to share because it's proprietary, it's trade secret, whatever it might be. The other thing is people asked about working together. You don't have to necessarily work with the person. So you don't have to be employed by the same employer. For example, maybe I work for someone and I have access to data, and I said, I could use your help on this project. Maybe help me set up the model, help me solve the model, help me present on it. We don't have to work for the same company, be employed by the same. We have to have, be interested in the same thing a little bit. We have to be interested in working together a little bit. So all those things have to come. So I don't really have a way of setting up groups. I used to assign groups, but that never worked too well. People were always unhappy with me. So I let the market work as the market works. So any questions that I didn't cover on the group project at all? And I think a lot of the things we do in the second half are really applicable to group projects. We did project management models. Everyone runs a project at some point, whether it's in their personal life or the professional life. Everyone runs a project, so that is great application. What we're on right now is very applicable to a lot of business situations, and we're talking about forecasting. So just start a review of forecasting. We are doing something called time series forecasting. And time series forecasting is we look back over the past and say, hey, what happened in the past with this variable that we're interested in is probably a good indicator of what's going to happen in the future. And then when we look at a time series, we break it into 4 components. And we're really only dealing with 2 of the components. Actually, 1 of the components. What are the 4 components that we talk about with a time series? Where it's headed long term, what do we call that? Where it's headed long term? We call that the long-term trend, right? Long-term trend can be tracking upward or tracking downward. It could be linear upward, linear downward, positive linear, negative linear. It could be exponential, whatever it might be. Or it could be stationary, right? So what is going on over the long term? What is the trend this is exhibiting over the long term? And the second component, if you remember, was related to the changes of the seasons. We call that seasonal component. So the seasonal component is, retailers normally deal with big sales near Christmas time, and they deal with lulls in February and January and sometimes March. If I am selling products that are like ice cream, for example, obviously that's going to be a seasonal product. So some products are very seasonal, some are not. So seasonality are the patterns that exist of the months of the year, but it can be weekly seasonality, it could be quarterly seasonality, it could be annual seasonality. So those two things we deal with pretty well. Okay, we have models for those pretty well. The third component that I said is kind of tied to the economy. And we're not really great at predicting that. You can talk to the most genius economists, and they aren't going to come to a consensus about what the economy is going to do over the next year or next 5 years or next 10 years. What do we call that? The change in the economy, a rising tide raises all boats, and a sinking tide lowers all boats. What do we call that? What's that? Cyclical, right? The economy is cyclical, and we really can't predict that too well. And the fourth one is the worst one, because this one we have no clue about. The fourth one is something called random effects. And I think I used the example of, one year we had no accounting majors come in, and it wasn't like we did something different with our accounting program, and it wasn't like nationally accounting was going down the tubes. It was just random. We had 0 incoming freshmen. The next year we had 10. So it was just an anomaly, if you will. 3 buses pull up to the Wendy's. They typically don't have 150 customers in 20 minutes and 10 p.m. at night, but because those 3 buses pulled up, boom, it's a random event. Okay, so very hard to predict random events. So when we focus on that linear trend, we said we have models for both. We look at it and we kind of hypothesize a series. And if it is stationary, we have some techniques we can use to forecast. And stationary, how do we determine a stationary first? Give me one way we can determine it's stationary. When we have time series data, what's one way I can look at it and kind of say, it looks stationary to me? I can graph it, right? I can do a line chart or a scatter diagram, and I can look at it, and visually I can see, it looks like it's not doing much, or maybe it's positive or negative, but I can graph it, I can visually see it. But sometimes that's not precise enough, because maybe what my subjective interpretation of the data is visually, and yours is different. So we also want to look at some quantitative methods. And what do we use in this class for the number to determine if it was stationary or had long-term trend? What do we use? What was that value called? Remember we added trend line. What was it called? We call it, it's the R squared value, and it stands for coefficient of determination. And the coefficient of determination is a value between 0 and 1, which is 0% to 100%, which indicates the percentage of the movement of the y value that can be determined by movement in the x value. And I think what do we say for a cutoff for that? 0.20, 0.15? The ones you get in the book will either be real low or real high. Okay, so there's not going to be any kind of nebulous kind of area. Okay, but 15%, 20%, it's lower than that. We can say it's stationary. So we have stationary models, and we talked about, I believe, 4 models. What were the 4 models that we talked about? Once we've determined it's stationary, we want to forecast going forward. What were the 4 models that we said? This is the easiest one. A lot of people use this. They said, what's your budget for copying for your department? Well, it is whatever the hell it was last year, right? What do we call that? We call that the last period technique. So, whatever it was last year, that's my budget for this year. It's called the last period technique. Sometimes the last period, we say, hey, why just use the last period when we have all kinds of data points? So we may use something called the moving average. And the moving average could be a 3-week or 3-month moving average, a 4-week, a 5-week, whatever it might be, but it's an average of the last so many data points, right? We're saying, and let's not just look at the one. The thing about the moving average is it gives, if it's a 5-week moving average, it gives the 5 weeks ago the same weight as last week. And really, probably what happened last week is a better predictor of what's going to happen this week than what happened 5 weeks ago. So we use something called the weighted moving average to give those previous values weights. And a lot of times you see a 3-week moving average and it's 60, 30, 10. So 60% to last week, 30% to the previous week, and 10% to 2 weeks ago. And then the last one, which is probably the most non-intuitive, but this one deals with, it takes into account all of the values. It starts at value 1 and forecast, and then forecast value 2 until we get current. And it's called something called exponential, probably spelled wrong, smoothing. Because it's called smoothing because it uses a smoothing constant, alpha, and alpha determines how quickly it responds to changes in the actual values and how quickly it's smooth. Okay, so it's always between 0 and 1. So those were the stationary models, and we'll take a look at some of those tonight. And we said if it had linear trend, there were 2 the book talks about, and we kind of ignored the second one. So if it has linear trend, what did I say is the dominant form of forecasting for something that exhibits linear trend? And it's not just used for forecasting, it's used for a lot of reasons. What do we say? There's actually whole courses on this. Not at St. Francis, but lots of places. We use something called linear regression. Okay? And what linear regression does if we plot something on the x-axis and something on the y-axis, and it looks like this, okay? Well, we can purely see that's a positive trend, but we want to know what line best fits those points, okay? Least squares regression says it'll find the line that best fits those points, and it'll give you that equation. So it's saying we can relate x to y through this equation. Y is equal to 10x plus 100. It also has the r squared value. So if the r squared value is 90%, think about what this is saying. It's saying, hey, the x can account for 90% of the y value. So let's say the x, I don't know if I used this example in class, but let's say the x is temperature and the y is ice cream sales. Well, it's telling me if we plot that and we come up with that least squares regression line, it's telling us that 90% of the movement of my ice cream sales at my stand are related to how hot it is, 10% other factors, right? And it's also telling me I can pretty accurately predict how much ice cream I'm going to sell by just plugging in for the temperature, plugging in for x. Okay, if it's 90 degrees, plug in 90 times 10. Gives me 900 plus 1,000. Plus 100, that gives me $1,000. Okay, so that's going to be my sales. So we can do that with any 2 variables, and a lot of times when we're talking about forecasting, what we have over here is time. So we're saying, this is related to time, whatever it is. Sales related to time. Time's pushing it up or time's pushing it down. But it's definitely trending, right? It's definitely trending with time. Time is definitely pushing it one way or the other, right? That's what we're saying. We say it has linear trend. So that is, that's not quite chapter 7 in a nutshell, but that's a big component of it. The last important component of chapter 7, and I love this aspect of forecasting, is what? Is that not only can we forecast something, but we can tell you how good of a forecast it is. How can we tell you how good of a forecast it is? That's a nice thing. You can say, here's our forecast, and here's how good this technique is, historically speaking. You guys remember those performance measures? Okay, when we looked at that template, we say, hey, you know what? Maybe we have 52 data points, and we're trying to predict week 53. I can go back and use that technique and say, what would I have predicted for week 5 using this forecasting method? Well, hey, I actually have the value for week 5. How good it was, right? So not only can I say, here's our forecast, but we can look at things like, my favorite one is the MAPE, which stands for mean absolute percentage error. So if it's off 4%, typically, and my forecast is 50, well, I can say, 50, let's make it easy. Let's say the MAPE is, 5%. I can say, 5% of 50 is 2.5. So somewhere between 47.5 and 52.5. My forecast, my point forecast is 50. I'm saying this thing's off 5% historically. So if we go 5% lower, 5% higher, I can kind of give a range then for my forecast, not just a point value. Does that make sense? So let's I gave you some homework problems. So let's go through this process for at least one stationary, one linear. Which one would you like to do? All right, I'll choose one. Let's go to my thing. All right, let's do number 21 on page 435, okay? It says, Pat Young, manager of the Burger Barn restaurant in Logan, Utah, is interested in determining an optimal inventory policy for frozen French fries. The number of pounds of French fries used by the restaurant over the past 15 weeks is as follows. Wants us to A, graph the time series, B, verify statistically that this time series is stationary, and then it uses us some different methods. So let's find the data. This is 21. So let's see, material by chapter, chapter 7, and this is burger. So problem 21 and 22, let's bring up the Burger Barn. Okay, so here's our data. So we have the data that's in the book, and someone has been nice enough to type it in for us. So I'd like to graph this. Okay, so I'm going to highlight column B, and I'm going to go up to insert, and I'm going to go over here to line chart. And I'm just going to pick the plain line chart. And we can see, we've had some movement here. It's gone up and it's gone down and it's gone up again and down and up again. But boy, it doesn't look like it's a long-term trend anyway, right? So, excuse me, I could, I could change some things. This is all grayed out because it's not up converted, but let me up convert it so we can make it nicer. So I go to File and click Convert, and it's going to up convert it to the latest version of Excel, so I can use all the nice tools. If I click on the chart again, go to Design, there's several different styles that I can use. Yeah, almost, no, that's let's see. That one's not bad. And then I can add my axes. For example, I can go to Axis Titles. I want a vertical axis title, and this is pounds of French fries, so I should enter that in, pounds of French fries. Okay. And this is weeks, but that's good enough, all right? It looks stationary to me. I want to validate that it is stationary, so I'm going to right-click on any point on that line. I got to get the line. And I'm going to go to Add Trend Line. And I'm going to put a linear trend line, and I'm going to display the equation on chart, display R squared value on chart. And it puts in a trend line for me, and it also puts in a equation for that trend line and an R squared value. So a couple things here tell me it's stationary. Give me one thing that tells me it's stationary. One thing. Dylan?
Your R squared values.
Okay, very good. R squared value is very, very low. It's 0.2%, right? What that's telling me is, you know, this movement in the Y value is not being driven by movement in the X value, which is time. Okay, it's not trending upwards or downwards. We also see that the slope of this line, this 9.2857, is very small when we compare it to the y-intercept, right? It's kind of negligible. 9 is kind of negligible, you know, when we compare it to 16,452. Okay, so that's telling us that this damn thing is stationary. So that's all we've done at this point, is determine that it's stationary. All right, we could do some other things, but let's just leave it alone. So after we determine stationary, it says use a 3-week moving average, calculate the forecasted weekly demand for fries for weeks 16 to 20. Use a 4-week, and then it says which one's better. Okay, so I am going to utilize my template that says forecast template. So I'm going to bring that up, and oops, you see that it has multiple tabs, and one of the tabs it has is simple moving average. So I'm going to take my data, which I'm going to copy A2 down through B16, and I'm going to bring it over to the simple moving average. I'm going to paste it in A11. I also have to tell it two things. I have to tell it how many periods in my moving average. Well, it looks like there are, in this case, 15 periods in my moving average. I'm sorry, I think it said do 3 weeks, right, first. And there are 15 periods total. So what it's done is it's come up with a forecast of 16,366.67 for my week 16, okay, is my forecast. My mean absolute percentage error at this point is 5.1%. Let's change it to 4 weeks. So now it's going to average the last 4, and it comes up with 16,475. So this one is 5.51%, and this one is 5.10% is the mean absolute percentage error. So historically speaking, which one was better? The 3-week moving average or the 4-week moving average? The 3-week, it has a lower mean. Now it didn't just say forecast week 16, it said forecast week 16 through 20. So that's 5 weeks, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Because it's stationary, my forecast for week 16 is 16,366.67. What's my forecast for week 17 then? The same. Week 18, the same. 19, the same. Week 500, the same. Because it's stationary, every forecast value is the same because we're saying it's stationary, so it doesn't matter how far we go out, it's the same damn value. Yes. Okay. Very good. Let's look at number 22. So it wants us to use the same thing, but it wants us to use various smoothing constants. So I'm going to take that data, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go to exponential smoothing and paste it into A9. I have 15 periods worth of data. I'm going to use a smoothing constant of 0.1 here. Okay, that's the one the book told me to use, and the MAPE here is 5.14. Let's try 0.2. I think the book told me to use that. That makes it a little bit worse. Let's do 0.05. That looks like it's a little better. Okay, but they're really negligible. How could I pick the best smoothing constant? What do we have that we've used the hell out of that picks the best of something? What tool have we used throughout this course that says, I will pick the one best way? What tool of Excel though? Solver, right? So let's use Solver to try to pick the best smoothing constant. So I'm going to go up here to my data. I'm going to go to Solver. And what do you think we want to minimize to pick the best smoothing constant? What do you want to minimize?
Error.
Yeah, let's minimize the error. So I'm going to say minimize, and I don't know, let's minimize the MAPE. So that's in J3. What am I allowing Solver to change? What is my decision variable? What do I allow Solver to change? The smoothing constant, right? That's what I'm trying to decide. What is the best smoothing constant? What are my constraints in this case? What about the smoothing constant? What thing constrains the smoothing constant? The smoothing constant has to be between what two values? 0 and 1. So I'm going to add a constraint to say E3, my smoothing constant, has to be less than or equal to 1. And by saying make unconstrained variables non-negative, I'm basically saying that, right? I'm saying greater than 0 and less than 1. And right now our MAPE is 5.06. We want to see if Solver can do better. So we'll click Solve. Solver does find a solution. It said, which is kind of crazy, it says we can get down to a MAPE of 4.95 if we use a smoothing constant of 0, which is not really something we typically do, which gives us a prediction of 16,400. Okay? So do you see how we can use these things in tandem, right? We can use Solver to pick the best smoothing constant. Does that make sense? What we did there? Yes? No?
Yep.
Okay, because you're going to have to do it on your take-home, so hopefully you know how to do it. All right, so let's look at one that might have time series. And I think number 30, okay, uses time series. So it says that sales in thousands of dollars at Getaway Computer over the past 40 weeks has been as follows. So let's see if we can find that data. Oh, maybe I didn't give you that data. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'll give it to you, Salt. I'm going to copy this to a blank workbook. All right, so this is the data that's in the book, right? This matches the data in the book. Week 1 is 238, week 2 is 251. Yeah, it looks right, okay. So how do I want to determine that this has trend? I'm going to do what? Just like I did before, I am going to, let's highlight column B. Let's go to insert. Let's go to line chart. Let's graph it. Wow. That thing definitely looks like it is exhibiting trend, right? Looks like a straight line almost. It's trending upward. Let's validate that numerically. I'm going to right click on that line. say add trend line, add a linear trend line, add equation on chart, display R squared value on chart, and I have this. What tells me, besides visually looking at it and seeing that it is really linear, really linear, what tells me here that it's linear? Well, the slope is 5, which is not insignificant when compared to the intercept, which is 242. But what it really tells me is the R squared value is 99%, meaning 99% of the movement of the Y value can be determined by movement in the X value. So time is really driving this thing up. Now, where is the regression equation? We've already done it. Where is it? Y is equal to 5.4492 plus 242.39. If we want to predict week 41, how would we use that equation to predict week 41? What would we do? Plug 41 in for X, right? If we want to predict week 45, we plug 45 in for X. This one's going to give us different values, right? Because we're saying it's trending upward, so we're saying week 41 is going to be less than week 45, and week 45 is going to be less than week 50. Now, if we want, we can copy this data into the linear regression tab, and it's going to give us the same thing. So it says week 41 is 465, week 42 is 471. If you notice the difference there, the difference between those two is about 5.4, something like that. You can see that's because that's the slope. So if we plug in 41, we're going to get this. Week 42, we're going to get this. It must have asked us for sales over a quarter or something like that. Let's see.
13-week quarter.
Okay, yeah, determine sales over the upcoming 13-week quarter. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, here's the 13 weeks. And all we did was sum all these up, okay? Well, actually it summed up these, and then we needed a 53 because to get to 13 weeks. So it summed up these and then added J2, because this, using H2, like we plug in 60, it'll give us the forecast for time period 60. If I plug in 53, it gives me 53. I think this one also asked you about Holt's technique. I told you we're not really going to use Holt's technique, so you can ignore that for part B. Holt's technique is like a sister of exponential smoothing. It uses two smoothing constants. It uses something called alpha and gamma. One is for the trend and one is for the stationary. All right, so that was one that was stationary and one that was linear regression. That's how we do those problems. Any questions on that?